What motivates a person to be the first to buy a new product or try a new service? To be part of a group of early adopters. Today we're going to be talking to a Genesis distributor and a Genesis owner about why they were early adopters of the Genesis brand and what their experience has been. Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of The Roads Less Traveled. I'm joined today by my co-host Richard Trevisan, Brand Director of Genesis Motors, and our guests today are Ray Knoll, Dealer Principal of Genesis Niagara, and Stephen Kilmer, a Genesis owner himself. Now Rain, the concept of this video series is really talking about taking the road less traveled. So how has your experience embodied the concept?
Well, taking the road less traveled started early in my life. Following my passion for music, I was on the road touring the US and Canada and bands such as Ruckus, Robbie Ray had a TV series on CBC, to currently doing keyboard tracks on a band's Storm Forces release and creating the brand, the sound brand for Performance Auto Group. I started in my early days of selling cars and growing through every facet you need to become the dealer principal. A few years ago when Genesis first started in Canada, we were honored to be asked to be one of the new distributors. There was only 26 in that initial rollout and we were going to be one of them. We took the road less traveled and we committed fully. We had full-time staff and resources, what you needed to get a brand going. That decision helped us become the #1 volume distributor in Canada out of the gate, and we never looked back.
Great, well that is certainly an unconventional path to success and to the top. And Genesis is certainly anything but a conventional brand. So if we start from there, talk about the Genesis distributor model. How is that different from every other traditional distribution model out there?
Maybe Richard, you can take that?
Yes, and we have a very unique business model. And let me just focus on one key element of this business model, and that's what we see as our centralized inventory. And Rain and actually even customers really benefit from this. And why? Why? Because a customer can select their car online, and then it doesn't matter if this specific distributor has their own inventory or not, because the cars are all in a centralized inventory. So we're giving the customer the full choice of what they would like to purchase. That's the advantage for the customer. And from the business point of view, we give flexibility and efficiency to our distributors like Rain, so they don't have to worry about planning and managing inventory.
Great. And Rain, what about yourself?
Well, with the one price philosophy, they've got the 5-year warranty, the full maintenance, the valet. It really sets the stage for customer satisfaction and no surprises. Also, our customers appreciate the one pricing, no haggling, the back and forth. People really don't want to get into that anymore. And what it does is it creates the ownership experience as being the differentiator.
And Rain, yeah, speaking of customer relationship, if we look at our previous episodes, we were really focusing on the importance of relationship building versus a transaction-based brand. How do you see that in the role of yourself and your Genesis experience manager towards the customer? And then also, how do you see the evolution of that?
Our amazing team really understands the true meaning of relationships. And the relationships are earned over time. They're earned by following through and listening and being attentive and following up and keeping people informed. And if we make a mistake, we have to own it and you recover quickly. And of all those things, that's what makes it more pleasurable and easy to do business with Genesis.
And from the point of view of what you see as a next step, you know that across Canada now we're going into a brand center strategy where we continue our omni-channel, and you are actually one of our first distributors to start building.
It's a needed component of it. All other things we do really well, but in a true omni-channel, you also need to have the bricks and mortar, as they call it.
That's great. Now, bringing the conversation back, we also have a Genesis owner joining us today. We have Stephen Kilmer. How are you today? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
My name's Stephen Kilmer. I'm the president of a healthcare-only investor relations firm called Kilmer Lucas Inc. And I'm the proud owner of a Genesis G80 Sport.
Great. Well, we're so happy that you're joining us today. Now, the concept of our whole series is talking about taking the road less traveled. So how has your experience embodied that concept?
You know, in a way, I think it almost defines it. I started out in high school as the very first punk rocker in my high school in suburban Toronto. Then when I went to university, I ended up creating a joint venture with a couple of companies, including one of the world's largest food companies, designed to really help that company save its Canadian subsidiary at the age of 19. Feeling rather Herculean by the time I was 20, I picked up the directory of directors, picked the 10 largest companies in terms of the number of listings that they had for vice presidents, and sent my resume in a gift basket to each of those CEOs' homes. That turned out to generate an offer of employment from Midland Walwyn Inc., which was the largest stock brokerage in Canada at the time, the largest independent stock brokerage. So I became one of Canada's youngest stockbrokers ever. And then a couple of years after that, I developed an investor relations function for a Canadian healthcare company that had just listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, that had invented and was the first to commercialize a LASIK vision correction procedure. After running that investor relations and frankly public relations program for about 15 years, I started my own firm doing that for other healthcare companies about 12 years ago.
Now, from my understanding, you also have an unconventional path to Genesis ownership. As I understand, you actually won your G80 at the Pearson Airport Genesis Experience Center. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. It was pretty awesome. So, you know, before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, my job involved a lot of travel, particularly to the Northeast. So I found myself at Pearson quite often. After one of those trips, I received a phone call that I had won the contest. And at the time I was driving a German-made performance SUV, 600 horsepower, extremely expensive. And I had heard of Genesis before and noticed them on the road, but I didn't know a lot about them. So I ran out and did as much research as I could. And all the reviews I found, both in terms of the technology, the engineering of the car itself, but also the customer experience, were just, absolutely outstanding. I never read something so positive before. And so for me, the choice was very easy to get rid of my very expensive German car and to switch to the Genesis.
Yeah, Steven, I remember that day I was giving you the keys, and that was a great experience also for me to learn about you. So, but now speaking of learning, now that you've been driving your G80, what do you see as unique in our brand that really fits with your lifestyle?
I think it's the combination of luxury, technology, but also performance. This car has obviously less than 600 horsepower versus my previous car, but also weighs about half as much. It's a sedan, which is a much more enjoyable ride, much more race car feel. Frankly, I never really was all that into this in the past, but I get noticed. The car gets noticed, and so that's something that makes you feel good.
And now that we actually converted you into a sedan exclusive owner, what's your favorite feature if you had to choose one?
It's really the customer experience, and quite frankly, again, you would think that someone that had won the car probably wouldn't experience all the great things afterwards. And I've been treated by Genesis like I've never been treated by a car company before. The valet service, just the relationship management, it's just absolutely outstanding. Frankly, I was happy to win the car, but I didn't expect that all the follow-through would also come with it, and the company hasn't treated me any different.
In 2020, obviously it's been a challenging year. How did you overcome those challenges? What are the greatest lessons that you've learned?
It's pointed to a few things, and it's changed how we do business, and we do business now much more, my business is a very relationship-based business, very connection-based, but it was never very efficient. So for example, I did have to travel 3 hours to get to Manhattan and 3 hours to come home for 2 hours worth of meetings. Now everybody can just go online, use Zoom or one of the other platforms, and have meetings all day long, face-to-face meetings, quality meetings, without being interrupted by all that travel.
And Rain, what are some of the biggest lessons and key takeaways from 2020 for you?
It raises the awareness that you have to always be looking ahead, anticipating the things that are going to happen in order to adapt, and you still need to grow through these periods. Genesis, they did an incredible job because they were already there. They were already omni-channel. You could already do what you wanted to do from home, from in person to service to sales, and really it's not something that that really now is not a want to anymore. It's really a have to or a need to. And Genesis was the first.
Well, adaptability, being nimble, these are big key takeaways from 2020 that we've all learned. So with that in mind, thank you so much for joining us, Richard, Rain, and Stephen. And thank you for joining us on this episode of The Roads Less Traveled. If you're interested in learning more about the Genesis product lineup or how to reserve your own Genesis experience, head over to genesis.ca.